Hello everyone, welcome to the Startup and Career Show. This is the podcast where we discuss the professional journeys of distinguished leaders, including startup founders, corporate leaders, authors who share their real life experiences. Today we have with us Mr. Karan Bajaj, founder of WhiteHat Jr, an edtech company acquired by Bajaj, considered among the fastest exits of its size in India. As an author, he's written 4 books previously and has now come up with his latest book, The Freedom Manifesto, based on his life and startup experiences. A very warm welcome, Karan. Glad to have you on the podcast today.
My pleasure, Rishabh. Great to be here. Thank you.
So, Karan, to begin with, would request if you could share your professional journeys all these years because you have an unconventional journey, so to speak, right?
Yes, my professional journey started after IIM. I joined Procter and Gamble, and then essentially did that for a few years. But essentially, overall, the last 2 decades of the corporate journey is half, I would say, in the consumer products domain with Procter and Gamble Craft, also some consumer projects with Boston Consulting Group. Then I became the head of Discovery in India, Discovery Channel in India in media. And then before starting WhiteHat Jr. And I would say parallelly, what was going on was that I was going deeper and deeper into my writing. So I had written my first novel in India, then Keep Off the Grass in 2008, wrote another novel, then wrote my first global or international novel was published in 2015. So I almost had a parallel track going with my corporate career of my fiction writing career. For that's been kind of the summary of the journey, like half corporate and I would say half writing. Yeah.
Wow. So, Karan, your journey has been quite interesting, and the fact that I went through your book, right, which also uncovered so many things about your journey, and I want to touch base on a couple of them. But the fact is, Karan, when your friends were settling down, getting married, buying homes, and all of that, but you were in a very different zone. So didn't you feel like missing the bus, the rat race that people just get into after the college life and all? So wanted to understand your state of mind since we have students listening to this podcast.
I would say definitely I felt like that very deeply. To give you a more specific transition point, at about age 29, I had spent about 6 years in Procter& Gamble, straight out of IIM, Indian Institute of Management, Bangalore. I had done quite well, and I was moved from India to Singapore and then to the US, which was a bit unusual at that point of time to go to the US in marketing, brand management early. And so I done quite well with them. And then what I felt suddenly at age about 28, 29 was that I was feeling that I would live the same life that I was living for the next 2, 3 decades, right? So I felt like I'd continue to do okay in my job, continue to keep climbing up the ladder, and it didn't feel like that was what my life should be about, sort of a thing fully. So at age 28, 29, I decided to leave Procter& Gamble. And I didn't know what I would do next exactly because it wasn't like I wanted to leave job A for job B. And I decided to kind of backpack around the world. And I had like this dream that I would live in South America. I would cross the Amazon by boat from Brazil to Peru. So I did that. So I went to South America and crossed the Amazon River by boat, and then lived there in Brazil, Peru for a few months. Then went to Mongolia, and then to Bhutan, and then to Eastern Europe. So I was just like basically following my direction there. And there was a lot of insecurity when I actually made the transition. But the worst part was that when I came back, I didn't come back very enlightened, or I came back, I guess, somewhat changed. But I'd come back on the same day Lehman Brothers had collapsed in the US in 2008, September. And there were no jobs at all. I'd left my job. And I kind of was very desperate because I'd spent all my money while traveling and I had no money left also. So I think at that point of time, I would say I was highly insecure because I was reaching age 30. I felt I had nothing to show for it because I was unemployed. I was living on a couch in my sister's house in the US, like applying desperately for jobs for a few months, and no relationship at that point of time. So I was like, and at that time of time, people were sending all these, in the Yahoo groups that used to be there, people were sending pictures of their houses and their first child. And I was like, I'm really fallen off the wagon, despite the fact that I was doing, I always thought I'd done reasonably well at IIM. So I never thought my life would be such a big train wreck. So I really regretted at that point of time my decisions. And yeah, so I did go through that same insecurity, I would say. Yeah.
Got it. So I think especially this the point for those students right? Because everybody goes through it, after some
Yeah.
many years, because the
Yeah.
career journey is not at a point in time, right? It's a full canvas that we need to look at over
Correct.
spread from say
Yeah.
20-30 years, right? It's not just
Yeah.
one or
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
But Karan, the fact that you've done so many backpack travels, you've also stayed in an ashram, right? Almost become a yogi kind
Yeah.
of a thing, right? So can you
Yeah.
share those experiences as well? How did they transform you as a person?
Yeah. I think dramatically transformed me as a person. I would say uh, the first move, the first leap is always the hardest. So, as I said, when I'd first taken the decision to kind of travel and backpack, and I remember my mother at that point was, she told me that, look, you are in the US now, but that doesn't make you an American. Indians don't do these kind of things, like sort of a thing. And then even my job at that time, Procter& Gamble was like, this is a one-way door. If you leave, you're doing very well. If you leave, we won't take you. The company doesn't take people back. And I think that transition was very hard, and then returning back from that and really being a failure at that at that point, not being able to find a job. But I think the great thing that happened was, in a way, I'd lived my worst case scenario right after the first leap, where I didn't have a job and I had to find one. Then you realize after a while that you do, you'll hustle a little bit and you'll find a job again. After 3 4 months, I did find a job with the Boston Consulting Group, and I realized that the travels had made me really, really deep. I had really changed during this period. I'd written my first novel during my backpacking days. The novel opened a completely different creative part of my life. I started to realize that all my life experiences were like, I kind of emptied my creative well, and I could just see my change as I was looking for more experiences for my next book. So I think the first leap was the hardest. Then after that, I started to realize that when you are growing dramatically inside you, then in some way the world rewards you because of the growth that's happening inside you. So what I saw was that when I came back from my travels, I actually did very well at my job. I was more silent, and got promoted pretty fast again. So I started to formulate this idea that, look, growth inside will lead to growth outside, and the world systems won't be efficient in the short term, but they'll be very efficient in the long term. So in the short term, you'll go through these ups and downs of you'll come back, won't find a job, etc. But in the long term, if you've grown dramatically, then you'll find that the world will reward you for that growth. So then, anyway, that said, then I spent another 3 4 years in my job and did quite well. And then I had another transition point where I had a choice to either just keep doing my job, and I was realizing I was growing very incrementally there, or take another leap of faith. My mother had died from cancer, so I was very pulled to this yoga meditation thing. It was very like, it really struck me, the frailty of the human body, and the meaning of life. So in 2012, after 4 years of coming back from my first backpacking trip, my girlfriend at that point of time and I decided to live in an ashram in India for a year and become yoga teachers, and like really deepen our practice of yoga and meditation. So I left I went from Europe to India by road, backpacking, living on very bare means, and reached India and stayed in the Shivananda ashram where I did my yoga teachers training. Then went up to the Himalayas in Uttarkashi, learned meditation, and I did that for almost a year during this period. So, but yeah, I think the bigger point though is that once you take the first leap and you realize that actually, if you've grown dramatically from an experience like this, the world will reward you eventually, because you'll change, and in some form or the other, if you change for the better, then you'll do better in the world. I think that really became a mental model of sorts for the future endeavors I took, because after a few years again, I decided to become a writer full time, become a novelist, and did that. Then I decided to, leave Discovery to start my company, and I always followed that same paradigm that, look, um, grow a lot, and eventually the things will settle. Yeah.
But that's very interesting, Karan. But when you just spoke about discovery, right? So at the age of 39, I think since you were doing so well professionally, heading Discovery India business, so
Yeah.
taking leap of faith, you've already done that, right? So what happens, in the beginning, people have nothing much to lose, right? So they can
Yeah.
take some chances. But as you hit the middle life stages, many
Yeah.
people get too cautious about certain things, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
didn't you worry about losing out everything and then again starting afresh at the age of 39?
Yeah, no, I absolutely. I would say the worst was probably at age 35 when we had one young small daughter. She was 2 years old, and we were pregnant with our second daughter. At that point of time, when I decided to become a writer full time, a novelist in the US, that I think was probably the hardest decision. And then obviously, right at Discovery also was a little bit because I was like quite doing well at the corporate career, and it was a good job in India, and I'd like again like when I was doing a startup again, you go from like Discovery, for example, you were you were like meeting the prime minister for Man versus Wild with Narendra Modi. We were doing all that stuff, and suddenly you're in a like in a room alone, trying to pitch coding classes to parents, and everybody's like, "What is this?" and cutting your calls, and it's very like humbling when you go from a large company to starting on your own. But I think I had this. I think there are two or three things that helped me. One was I had these two or three principles, as I said. One was that growth will always be rewarded in the long term. So I knew that doing more, a couple of years more as a Discovery CEO, almost in the old world of traditional media versus running a tech startup of my own, building a tech product on my own, that's the growth decision. So I always have to make decisions of growth versus fear. And that was a good mental model, that always make decisions of growth and never make decisions of fear. I think the second mental model I always had was that life is going to be measured in decades, not in days. So the days are going to be painful, but the decades are good if you are choosing growth. So I think that helped a lot. And third, I have a model in my book which I call the salary divided by 14 lakh kind of rule, in which I always had this rule based on some mathematical calculations that it takes you X number of months to find a job, which is equal to your salary that you want divided by 14 lakhs, right? It's based on some like on large scale research and stuff. So I always had felt like that if I had enough buffer to like find to kind of go through the startup, if it fails, if I have another buffer to find a job after 9 to 12 months, whatever that calculation is based on my savings, then I should go ahead and take that plunge. So I had a little bit of like mathematical frameworks around that. Yeah. So I think with that, I would I would go ahead and take the leap. Yeah.
Wow. So, this is very interesting, Karan, that it reflects that you have not been stagnant at any point in time. You've taken some decisions. It might appear very radical from outside, right?
Yeah.
And especially to most of the people. But I think these days now, to even the young generation do understand these things, and they want to follow these paths as well. So that's very encouraging that you took this possibly when not many people were even thinking of doing that, right? In hindsight, it appears to be very good. I'm sure there would be
Right.
interesting turns and twists that you would have gone through. But Karan, the fact is, since again I come back to the same thing because students are our main target audience who will be listening to it, right? I wanted to ask a pertinent question that as the
Yeah.
CEO of Discovery India, you had everything at your disposal, right? But
Yeah.
as a startup founder, and I read this in your book that you called up around 60 people who had signed up for the trial WhiteHat Junior courses
Yeah.
and none took it forward. So, what was your
Yeah.
mindset in that very situation? Didn't you feel like quitting? So what kept you motivated to pursue with the idea?
Yeah. So I think very, very good question. You feel like quitting a lot, by the way, when you're doing a startup. So I think that's like nobody is immune from that, right? Because it's very tough. Like I think starting a company is, as you know yourself, is very, very tough. Um, I think the two things that keep you kind of like motivated. One is always, I think I would say mission and momentum, right? I would say mission, like I think you really should believe in what you're doing. I had really started WhiteHat Jr. because I felt like my life had changed at age 29 when I wrote my first novel. So I felt like creation, building something of your own, whether it's a book, a company, a YouTube channel, a podcast, a blog, the act of creation changes you. And the school system is not about, doesn't encourage creation at all. So I always felt like there should be a parallel to the school system, which is about creation. So right at the time of WhiteHat Jr., the idea was that, like, with coding, kids would build things, then we would do music and kids would build their own composition, and they would very early in their lives define themselves as creators, right? That was kind of the idea of WhiteHat Jr. So I was very passionate. I had my own kids. I felt like the school system would not serve this need, and I didn't want to do a better maths product, right? I was really after the right brain, that kids would be creators and they would identify themselves as creators. So I think the mission kept me going. And second, I would say, like, I think startup founders have to have this crazy optimism to always set to have a, I would say, a good combination of a big vision and very minute detail execution, right? And I think that combination gives you very good momentum for the small team that you have in the beginning. So I was very good at, like, I would say, setting very short term goals. कि look, 70 like we've been able to get 70 users to sign up for a trial, बस एक को convert करना है अभी. that should give us so the whole team, like whatever team, दो तीन लोग थे, they would be focused on कि उन 70 में से एक को convert करना है, and understand that process, and then let's define the next milestone and the next milestone. So that daily kind of energy and momentum that a founder can do is very good. I've seen that founders typically either very good at the mission, then like don't have that, you know, the 10x energy to keep pushing daily on smaller milestones, or they are very good at the smaller milestones but forget the bigger mission. I think that combination of mission and the daily momentum is very, very critical. That keeps you going. I think defining smaller milestones, like celebrating those smaller milestones when you get them, right? The first user who converted after 70 calls or something like that. I think that like that keeps you going, you know? Yeah.
Wow, this is interesting. Focus on the execution, but have a bigger vision.
Have a big vision and then focus on the daily momentum. And then I always believe that any product, any startup will work if it has just, I think I've just looked at one thing. Is it 10 times superior than the alternative that the user is using? So I always believe that for kids in grade 1 to 5 in India, I saw the alternative. The alternative was that they were going for hobby classes, or like their nannies were keeping them busy, or you know, the parents were struggling to keep them busy, right? Or they would drive, like a young kid would drive for an hour to attend a chess class. Those classes had no clear outcome. So I always believe that the creative space in India for kids, especially in the early years before they get into the rat race of maths and IIT, was like they had like a lot of time, and there was no like there was no particular one framework that kind of kept them fully engaged. So I thought that a activity-based class, which was remote, so that they don't have to travel at that young age, and outcome-oriented, that you build an app in 48 classes, etc. You know, that would organize this very fragmented creative hobby space in India. So I always believed that we were making a 10x kind of product versus the alternative. And that really kept me going. I was very clear that if you have a 10 times superior alternative for the parent, for the child, then eventually people will adopt it.
Wow. And this applies to any industry for that matter, right?
Any industry. I think even now when I'm working on a new startup kind of idea, I'm like constantly thinking about that, which is it truly 10 times superior to the alternative that the user is using? And does it meet some very deep, unarticulated human need, right? Like humans are driven by craving, by survival, by thriving, you know, like by community. Am I really addressing something very deep in the heart through this product? So I think maybe because I'm in the consumer space, I think my ideas are typically in the consumer space. I always think, is it 10 times superior to the alternative? And is there a very deep human need that is unarticulated that the product is meeting? And if it does, then eventually it will work. You know, like the journey is not rosy, but eventually it will work. Yeah.
True. Well said, Karan. But Karan, I think there are few students who also keep on telling me, right, that the podcast that I do with multiple founders and all. So most of them appears to be from a tech background, right? And so commerce वाले ये पूछते हैं कि सर अभी क्या commerce वाले हम startup नहीं कर सकते क्या? So I want this question, specifically on that side, that you are not a techie. You have been on the marketing and the business side of things. So how did you create a tech-based thing? How did you go about in the first space?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. I believe that, no, to be a founder, you don't need to be a tech person. It's great to have a tech co-founder, but to be honest, you'll really struggle to get a great tech co-founder when you are at the early stages, because like a typical tech, a very strong tech guy who comes in as a co-founder, etc., I've seen that they're motivated by two things. Tech co-founders are motivated by large scale of impact, right? Where they're artists in their own way. They want a large number of people to kind of look at their distribution, and they want a technically complex problem. In the early days, when you're still defining the product, you are not able to create that. Like I was discovery head, right? Yet I couldn't find a tech co-founder easily who was very, very good at that stage, right? So I think you won't find a tech co-founder easily. But my analysis after now multiple categories, and now I'm, for example, playing with some different startup ideas in ESG space, environment, healthcare space, which I'm interested in. What I've seen is that it's actually very easy to run a zero code MVP. It's actually like in almost all cases, you can run a zero code minimum viable product and get it in front of users within the month of coming up with an idea. And now I've looked at multiple categories to see that, yes, it's actually possible in every category, environment, health, education, that a zero code product you can get in front of the users for feedback very quickly. The moment you get the zero code idea in front of the users, which any commerce guy, non-tech guy can do, you get user feedback. And if the user feedback is promising to the degree that the user is almost taking the product from your hands, right? The first couple of people who started to use the WhiteHat Jr, like we did zero code, right? It was like a Zoom call with a teacher and a student, and they were using a coding software that existed on the internet, right? And when you saw that the users were loving the product, I knew I could build a company, right? So I think the model should be that if you're a non-tech person, do a zero code prototype within a month of coming up with the idea, rather than like going back and forth on karu na karu, kya hoga. Just do the zero code product. If you see users loving the product, then you can go ahead and start building the company, because you have the conviction then that people you hire, like the first tech people you hire, will have the conviction, and that conviction will then move the company forward. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Karan, for answering this. This was one of the questions that I kept on getting it. So, Karan, the other thing that actually hit me while reading the book was the way you have redefined the meaning of net worth as net impact. So,
Yeah.
can you explain, for our people to just know how are you equating that? Because this is the first time we are hearing this.
No, thank you for asking that. I think for me, one of the realizations, and it unfortunately came quite late, was that your net worth is truly tied to the impact you'll make in the world. And that's also a bit mathematical, the number of people you'll touch with what you're doing and the depth at which you touch them, right? And that's why typically CEOs have great net worth at age 60, right? Because that's the period, like you've slowly gone up the corporate ladder. At age 60, you're controlling an organization like, for example, Hindustan Lever, with like thousands of employees who are creating products that are touching millions of people. So you have the ability to create that impact on millions of people because you are a CEO. But if you want to short circuit that path, which is what I say in the book, that if you don't want to have that position at 65, you can do that younger, if you're able to create a lot of impact, because really life rewards you for the level of impact that you create. And for me, it was quite a shift, because I think the shift happened at age around 35 or so, when after my 1 year of yoga, I think it somehow happened. Like through the yoga and meditation, I somehow understood what, like till then, if I was even thinking of financial freedom, I would think of financial freedom on how can I get financial freedom, right? At age 35, when I started to think even of things like personal financial freedom, I realized it was linked to how effective is the, like, how effectively large will be the impact that I have. And that led me down a certain way, right? Because when I wrote my third novel, which was my first international novel, the starting point of writing that novel was, how will every word that somebody reads of this book benefit them? And I think that shifted a little bit on how I approached that project. And then and when you do that, even though the novel didn't work to the extent that I thought it would, that it didn't touch millions of people, like the show, I guess the book wasn't great enough or good enough to touch millions of people. I think it's set me down a particular path, and that led me to keep questioning. Even in discovery, I questioned, what will I do in this job which will touch millions of people, made those bets accordingly. Then WhiteHat Jr, again, right from the beginning, I always thought of a global platform where kids would be created large, and I always thought like it'll be large number of kids would create things. So there's both magnitude, large number of people, and there's depth of impact. And I think life typically rewards that, a large number of people being touched deeply. But if you think about how I gain financial freedom, how I should go, usme, your ideas are very suboptimal. Yeah.
Absolutely, Karan, because I think this is very, very interesting. Because so far, net worth was all about taking in and receiving, right?
Correct.
You've
Correct.
changed
And
the
this is what,
equation by showing the way as giving it out and creating impact, thereby increasing net worth. I
yeah.
think, thank you for doing that, Karan. This is awesome. And I wanted to touch base one more specific rule that you've spoken in the book, which is about 30/7 rule, right? So everybody understands 24/7. So for the benefit of
Uh,
listeners, if you can just help me
yeah.
take it.
So the 30/7 rule is interesting, right? Funnily enough, right? I did a lot of research for the book, so that I was not just saying things from my own personal experience of one, right? The incredible amount of research indicates that it takes 7 years for a startup to succeed. If you start a project, it takes 7 years for a startup to succeed, right? And that would mean either one startup will take 7 years, or you'll take multiple attempts at startups and it'll take you 7 years. When I looked at my personal observation, it was exactly that. When I really started to think about net impact, financial freedom from, by creating a large impact in the world, the first attempt was a novel that failed. Then I did another project that failed. Then I started the company. It took me about 7 years also before WhiteHat Jr was acquired by Bajaj. So I think that was the So it takes 7 years for a startup to succeed at a scale that you are kind of financially free, or at a very or have a large scale. And it takes about 30 years to become a CEO from the moment you join the corporate path. So you gain the same results in a startup in 7 years that you would gain in a corporate path at 30 years. So the 30/7 rule in the book is that, look, you can compress 30 years of corporate life by 7 years of 24, like, very, very hard effort by creating something from scratch. So if you really are motivated by, like, cutting the corporate ladder, etc., then, just be prepared. That'll take you 7 years of like really hardcore effort to get there, and of creating something of your own. But if you do that, if you put in those 7 years, you'll kind of short circuit 30 years of corporate life in the best case scenario and get the same outcome. So I think that's what the book is about. And the strange thing is, Rishabh, I've seen three industries very closely. Well, personally, novels, writing, media, TV, movies, etc., with discovery, and then startups. They all have the same rule that 90% of those projects fail, despite the best people in the world evaluating them. Startups funded by venture capitalists, novels published by top publishers, TV channels launched by top media companies. Yet 90% of creation projects fail. I think that's the one thing people don't understand. That, look, when you do your first startup or your first book, there is actually a 90% chance it will fail. And that's why one of the rules in the book is 90% failure, 100% learning. You learn so much from that failure that your next project will be better, and then your next project will be better, and eventually one will succeed. So I think, and surprisingly, I've seen it with three creation industries, 0 to 1 industries, exactly the same mathematics. 90% will fail, 10% succeed, but you just have to keep increasing your surface area of taking chances so that you eventually get to the one that succeeds, because your probability of success keeps increasing.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
In fact, Karan, you've got a nice style of equating all these, complications into a simple math formula where
Right.
everybody can understand. So that's awesome. But Karan, in the book, I also read somewhere where you suggest choosing experiences over possessions, right?
Yeah.
Because this is of course your journey has been all about that, right? So if you can just touch base on that aspect as well, that
Yeah.
everybody
I
wants
mean,
to accumulate, right?
yeah.
You are trying to
Right.
liberate people by saying this.
Yeah, and I think that's changed a lot in the world overall. I think that's changed a lot, which is, see, I think my general principle is that whenever I'm like, I basically try to think that I should not buy anything that depreciates in value, and it should. So that's why I'm, even now I don't have a house. I've never bought a house. I rent. I haven't bought a car. I rent. I lease my car, because I feel like I should not be owning anything that keeps depreciating in value. I should own things that accrete in value, and typically those are things that are experiences, right? Because with your experiences, when you put your money behind experiences, then you'll grow a lot, and that's something that compounds and grows in value. While you buy a possession, it just basically keeps going down. So I think that's my logic, and as a result of it, I think I have just stayed away from ever buying houses, this, that, like anything that depreciates, and put my money instead in, like, taking a year to learn yoga. I think what I saw with my friends was that they fell into a trap very early of mortgages and this and that, right? While I was very liberated at 35, I was like 32, I was like 28, 30, I was like, backpacking. Then 35, I was learning yoga. And then and then I was becoming a writer, because I never had any mortgages, EMIs, etc. to pay. My life was very light. And I saw that with those experiences, I grew so much that they really paid dramatically in the long term, right? And people don't understand that writing a novel is actually very similar to creating a startup, because in the novel you start from a blank page, and you have to have that confidence that, look, one day this will become a book that publishers will buy, and then they'll send it to readers, and readers will actually read. So you have to have that confidence that, look, I can create this from a blank page, and I just have to come in daily, keep putting in my input, give 100% of my energy to the input and not think about the output. And with that just model of 100% energy to the input, one day you'll create the book. And startups are very similar. When you come at zero, like, and nobody's buying your product, nobody understands what you're doing. These ideas are always at the edges of a system, never at the center of it. So everybody, like, and you just have to keep showing and throw. And so I think the experiences that I have with my backpacking, my writing, really shaped the journey of WhiteHat Jr., for example. So that's why I think the experiences grew. If I spend my money instead of writing full time, or I don't know, doing yoga full time instead of on a house, I don't think it would have given me those kind of returns. Yeah, that's
Absolutely,
the
absolutely.
advice. Yeah.
True, true. Karan, moving on next, just wanted to know one piece of information in the sense that when a startup is on a growth mode, right, the
Yeah,
young founders often experience a challenge in developing a team, right? So
yeah.
can you share your experiences? How was it like developing the team where people got along, and how did you go about that?
First, I had some models, right? Right at the beginning of the company, I feel you need a hacker, designer, marketer combination, which means that you need at least one person in the team who's a hacker who like writes code, a marketer, right? Like who gets consumer feedback on the messaging and the go to market. And then you need a designer, which is typically the founder who has the whole product experience in mind, what the product does. So you need a hacker, designer, marketer combination right off the gate. So I think I had this model. So I was always very clear that I had a 7-member founding team after of a few months. Initially, I was zero. Obviously, I was the only one starting, but I had this hacker, designer, marketer combination in that. Once you are creating that product and you have some momentum behind that, I think you're able to build a good team with very clear frameworks, which is like I always have this framework, this 37 rule for my team, right? That हम लोग 30 साल की मेहनत 7 साल में compress करेंगे. So I think I was able to attract people of the same philosophy who were ready to just go all in for a startup with this knowledge that look, 30 years of corporate life we are compressing in 7 years in terms of wealth creation, in terms of like promotions, etc. You'll work very hard, but you'll kind of move up the ladder very fast. So I think that attracted a lot of the right kind of people overall. So yeah, I would say just have your I think your framework should be clear on the beginning stage versus the later stage, and inspire people with those frameworks well.
True, true,
Yeah.
true. So, Karan, again, from outside, your journey seems to be a wonderful one, right? But and with so many experiences that you've gone through, but you would have also faced many roadblocks and challenges. So,
Yeah.
briefly, if you can talk about it and how did you manage or overcome them?
Yeah, I think I mean I would say a lot of roadblocks and challenges along the way because I would say like when I became a full-time writer, for example, for I was writing for 2 years, as I said, when my kids were just being born, and it was very stressful, and my novel was rejected 61 times during that period, right? So I would keep getting rejected, and I would keep working and improving it, and keep working and improving it, and keep working and improving it. Then eventually it get published, and then also didn't work, right? It was a failure, so I had to kind of abandon my writing career, start again. I almost think that's like as I said, it's a 90% failure route on creation, right? When you're building something, you're going to fail. And when it happens, it's actually very, very in later you can look back at your life and you can see the tapestry emerge. In the beginning, it's just unraveled threads, and you're looking at all these moments. And, I remember going to when my novel had failed, or and I was like restarting my career again or trying to look for a job again. At that point of time, it was like I was comparatively easier to find the job that time because I had some experience in the corporate world by then. So I had, but I remember going to a family dinner, and I remember somebody saying that they would never want their kids to grow up like me, who are like unsettled at 35, 37, who are constantly kind of trying new things and not settling down. And it was very hurtful because I felt like, look, I was actually quite a good student in business school. How did I become like such a failure that nobody wants to be like me, or nobody wants their kids to grow up like me? So I think I've just constantly had these anybody who's in some creating in some kind will realize that it's just like a journey of like constant kind of failure and rejection, and then finding that courage within you that look, I just have to give my 100% energy to the input. The output is not in my control, but the input is in my control. I just have to wake up every day with the let me just give 100% of my energy to the input. So I've just been doing that for many years. I just don't think too much in terms of like failures and losses, and just keep thinking that how do I give 100% of my energy to the input daily, yeah.
Wow, I think this is awesome, Karan. These are such practical gems that you've spoken about in last half an hour or so that we've spoken. I think before you leave, just a last piece of advice that you want to give it to, especially the young founders or the students who are listening to this podcast.
For students who are listening, I would say my biggest advice would be to create something early. Anything. It could be a YouTube channel, it could be a blog post, it could be a blog, it could be a book, it could be a company. The first act of creation will change your life forever because you'll put all of your life into that first act of creation. Even if it doesn't work, you'll realize that you're in a way your well is empty, and you'll fill your well again with dramatic new experiences. and then you'll kind of pour it out into the second act of creation. Then you'll fill your well again, and life becomes very, very rich and kaleidoscopic. So I think doing your first act of creation early is my biggest advice.
Wow, I think this is awesome, Karan. And thank you for taking out time today with us. It was lovely
My
speaking to
pleasure.
you. Thank you, Karan, on this.
Thank you for the great interview. Thank you for reading the book, and thank you for supporting it. My pleasure. Thank you.
And to all our listeners, thank you guys for joining us today. Do read this book, The Freedom Manifesto, to live the life of your calling. Goodbye, guys. Signing off for now.